인생에 힘든 시간이 닥쳤을 때 우리는 어떻게 반응해야 할까요? 스테픈 포스터 목사님께서 말씀해 주십니다.
Sometimes in church we give this impression that if your life's successful, if it looks like you're smashing it, you're nailing it, then that must be that you're experiencing God's favor, that God is pleased with you, that He's blessing you. And the difficulty with that is that if your life is hard, if you're struggling, you can hear that and think, oh, this must be the opposite. You know, I must be failing, and that must be evidence that God is displeased with me, or maybe even that He's forsaken me in some way. And just because you're successful doesn't mean you're experiencing God's favor. You might be, but you might not be. God gives people over to their desires sometimes, not as a mark of His favor, but actually as a sign of His displeasure. And just because you're struggling, just because you're facing suffering and failure, doesn't mean that God is displeased with you, doesn't mean in some way He has forsaken you. I mean, look at Jesus. In the world's eyes, it didn't necessarily look like Jesus lived a very successful life, because sometimes the world and the church overvalues, finding a partner, and Jesus, was single, and Jesus didn't have a family, and Jesus didn't have a career, really a successful career to speak of. He wasn't wealthy in that sense, and even his closest friends let him down. Some of them betrayed him, and it looked like his life was a failure. And someone looking at it could say, well, God obviously was displeased with you. But we know that God was utterly and completely pleased with the life Jesus lived and the way He lived it. So if you're struggling, if you're going through a difficult time, if you feel like a failure, don't think that because you feel that way or you're experiencing that God is displeased with you, or that's a sign of God's displeasure. Actually, it might be the opposite. The way you are stewarding that difficult time in your life might be the thing that gives great pleasure to God. And He might be so proud of you as your Father in heaven because of the way you are living through that difficult season.